Once it was lunchtime, Tom took Lucy's lunch pack to her office and opened the door. I brought your lunch, he told her politely as he dropped it on the table, while Lucy avoided meeting his gaze. Thank you, Lucy murmured. She couldn't bring herself to look at his face or into his eyes at the moment. He knew the color of the undies she was wearing at the moment. He unsettled her. You are welcome. Enjoy your meal, Tom said, looking at her and observing how she kept looking at the laptop in front of her instead of looking at him. I will be heading out now, Tom said, and Lucy gave him a nod as he left the office. Once he had left, she let out the breath she had been holding. Maybe it was best she asked her secretary to get her lunch going forward instead of having Tom bring it. She wasn't sure, seeing him 3 times a day, in the morning when coming to work, during lunchtime, and in the evening, that after the close of work, like a medication prescription, was good for her heart and mental well-being. She raised a hand to her chest and tried to calm her heart. When she moved to Ludus, she hadn't planned on getting caught up in such a drama. How could everything change because of just one night? How long would she be able to keep up with this? Lucy tried to push the thoughts out of her mind as she ate. She focused on her lunch, and when she was done, she tried to return her complete attention to the work on her desk. She wasn't the type to be distracted from work or have divided attention when working because of personal issues, but since Tom came into her life, concentrating on her job was becoming more difficult by the day, and she feared that if she didn't do something about it soon, she would make a mistake that might cost her her job. Lucy's eyes flew to the door and her heart missed a beat when her office door opened again. She tensed, thinking it was Tom, but relaxed a bit when she realized it was Harry. Thinking he was there to meet the boss in his office, since she knew whether the CEO was in, only when Harry was going into the office, Lucy returned her attention to her laptop. She tensed and raised her head when she noticed he had stopped in front of her desk. What did he want? She asked herself as she looked at him in confusion. When are you getting married, Miss Perry? Harry asked, looking at her with a very strange expression in his eyes. I beg your pardon? Lucy asked in confusion, wondering where the question was coming from. You are engaged, are you not? Harry asked, his eyes falling on her ringless finger. Engaged? What made him think that? Why was he asking her such a personal question all of a sudden? Lucy wondered. Seeing the confusion on her face, Harry decided to follow a different approach. I suppose you're traveling for the weekend. Would you need Monday off? Or perhaps you'd be coming in late? Harry asked, watching her closely. Lucy's brow was creased in a deep frown as she tried to figure out what he was driving at. No, I'm not, Lucy said politely, and it was all Harry could do to keep himself from lying. She was a good actress, but not a very good liar after all. Sorry, my bad. I assumed you would be eager to travel over the weekend to spend some time with your fiancé, who was fighting for his life just last weekend, Harry said, making Lucy's mouth drop open in surprise, and then she quickly snapped her mouth shut. How could she have forgotten such an important detail? We broke up, she blurted out before she could think things through, and Harry's right eyebrow shot up. You broke up with your wounded fiancé? He asked in disbelief, and Lucy shook her head. He broke up with me, rather, Lucy said with a sad sigh. He wasn't happy that I left him on his hospital bed to resume work. He said I loved my job more than I loved him, so he called off our engagement, Lucy said, making a sniffling sound which left Harry in awe of her. Wow! Seeing how she was, he could almost understand why Tom was acting crazy now. He hoped she would remember this lie in the coming week. She seemed to have the ability to come up with lies on the spot, without needing to think it through. Or had she thought this one through before today? Harry wondered. I'm sorry about that, Harry said, and she nodded. Thank you. All right, then. I just came in to see if you would be traveling so I can relate the information to the CEO. Have a lovely weekend, then, Harry said with a wave as he walked out of the office. Lucy raised a hand to her chest. This office was going to be the death of her. Why was it always from one problem to the other? Why did she have to keep looking over her shoulder? She feared if she had to keep looking over her shoulders like this, she might trip in the process and make a mess of things. If only Tom hadn't been nosy enough to read her journal, he wouldn't have even talked to her in the first place. And if only she had known he was her neighbor beforehand, she wouldn't have taken Tom up on his offer at the club to be her one-night stand. If she had rejected his offer, she wouldn't have been in all this mess. She was the primary cause of all her problems, and Tom was the secondary cause. Thinking about everything now, she did a mental reverse on how her life here would have been like had she not even gone to the club in the first place. Placing both hands under her chin, with her elbow resting on the desk, she traveled down her imagination lane. She would have moved into her apartment, spent her time arranging her stuff, and resting. She would have woken up early and refreshed and resumed at the office earlier before the normal time on her first day at work. She would have met Mr. Harry, who would have been very impressed by her punctuality and her devotion to her job, and she wouldn't have had to lie about a fiancé who had been involved in an accident. She would have been pleasantly surprised later that evening to see her next-door neighbor, Tom, at her door with a tray of apple cobbler, welcoming her to the neighborhood. She would have gladly accepted his offer to help her move and arrange her stuff. Then, they would have had a normal conversation like neighbors, and maybe eat the apple cobbler together while he told her all about the city and neighborhood. The next day at work, she would have laughed at the coincidence of having Tom, her next-door neighbor, as her driver. It wouldn't have been a big deal because he hadn't seen her naked or done unholy things to her body. And then she wouldn't have had to go and complain to Mr. Harry that she wanted her driver to be changed. That way, she wouldn't be working in the CEO's office as his personal assistant when she had her own office. Now everyone was a problem to her. Tom, the CEO, and now Mr. Harry, who she suspected was suspecting her of lying to him. All of this was Tom's fault. Okay, enough of the blame game. Lou, snap out of it. Now that you know the cause of your problems, what is the solution? Lucy asked herself out loud as she took out her journal. Of course, she couldn't go back in time to change anything or undo what had been done with Tom, but going forward, she could try to resolve things to the best of her ability. It was clear that she wouldn't be able to get rid of Tom, since he was not just her driver but also her neighbor. Although quitting her job and leaving here would have solved all her problems, but it wasn't reasonable. She loved her job, and the salary was very attractive. She needed to find an easy way to solve her problems. Maybe if she could find out why the CEO was the way he was, she would know the best way to approach him and be friendly towards him. She winced at the thought. The CEO was a weirdo. Although the CEO was a weirdo, she knew that if she was able to befriend the CEO and serve him to the best of her ability, she would eventually be able to have him transfer Tom to another department without losing her job. She would ask him to promote Tom to a different department, not fire him. As long as Tom wasn't her driver, then everything would be okay. She could always avoid him at home by leaving the house very early and returning late. That way they won't have to see each other very much, at least until he got Anita. Lucy nodded her head. This was a good plan. She needed Sonia's help now. Although she had asked Sonia to help her find out what she could about the CEO, she had also asked Sonia not to tell Brian that she worked for his brother. Who knew how close the brothers were? Maybe, if she asked Sonia to tell Brian about her connection with his brother, Brian would put in a good word about her to his brother, and then the CEO would treat her more nicely. She wasn't really one who believed in using connections like this, and she didn't want to be misunderstood by others. But she also needed to solve her problems, and this seemed like the only way. Lucy groaned and raised a hand to her head, which was beginning to ache. She had too many in her head at the moment, and her thoughts were all over the place. She looked down at the journal, which was open in front of her, and the first thing on the list which she had written the previous night was to have sex with Tom and get that out of the way. She was going to make it happen soon. The next one on the list was to befriend Anita. That plan was also already in motion since she would be spending the weekend with Anita. Now she added the third item on the list, get close to the CEO. This would complete everything. Having sex with Tom would get him off her back concerning the sex talk. Befriending Anita would help her matchmake the two. That way, once Tom was in a relationship, he would stop showing up around her too much. Finally, getting close to the CEO would help her get him to transfer Tom to a different unit without making her lose her job. Seeing how organized the plans were, Lucy nodded her head. She was going to start working on these ultimate plans now. By this time next month, she would be rid of Tom and finally return to being herself, Lucy thought with a satisfied smile. Brian laughed out loud as he watched Sonia yell in frustration each time the shooting game ended, and she lost. He had to admit that although he didn't want a relationship with her, she was fun to be around and entertaining to watch. She wasn't pretending to be a proper lady or anything like other ladies did around him. She was just herself, and that made her fun to be around. He had learned several things about her within the hour since they started playing, and one of them was that she was a sore loser. She really hated to lose and reacted badly each time she lost a game. Another thing he had also learned was that she loved cussing a lot. She knew a lot of colorful cuss words, and that was probably because she was a writer, so her vocabulary was vast. This machine is fucking stupid. I swear they tampered with it to make players lose so they can spend more money trying to win. Sonia told Brian, who laughed as he raised his hand, checked his wristwatch. You don't have good sportsmanship. You're a really bad loser, Brian told her with a shake of his head, and she glared at him. I'm serious. It's more like you win one game and lose 3 games in a row. It's a pattern. Haven't you noticed it? Sonia asked, her annoyance obvious in her tone. What? The only thing I've noticed is that you hate to admit that you lost, Brian said with a playful smile. Yes, I hate to lose, but at least I won more rounds than you did, Sonia pointed out with a smirk. At least I lost graciously. I didn't yell or cuss or accuse the machine, Brian said with an easy smile. The movie is about to begin. We should start heading in now, Brian suggested before she could complain further, and Sonia grudgingly stood up with a scowl on her face. Brian placed both hands on her shoulders and turned her so she was facing him. You played well. You don't have to feel too bad about losing a couple of games, Brian said in an encouraging tone, and he kissed her forehead lightly, making Sonia look around to see if he was doing this because someone was watching them or taking pictures of them. When she didn't find anyone looking at them, she looked at him. No one is watching, she assured him, and Brian's lips curved upwards. I didn't think anyone was watching. I don't need anyone to be present before I treat my beautiful fiancé right, do I? Brian asked, patting the side of her face in a loving gesture. Seeing how he had been acting all morning, she could almost believe that their relationship was real. She knew anyone else watching would think so too. Wow, your acting skills are top-notch. Now I know why you have so many awards, Sonia whispered with a wide smile, as she gave him a thumbs up. Brian slid his arm around her waist and drew her closer to himself as he could whisper for her ear only. I don't like it when you do that. Are we going to stick to the deal, or do you intend to call it off? Brian asked in a slightly irritated tone. You don't like it when I do what? What do you mean? Sonia asked in confusion, wondering why he sounded upset. You asked me to treat you as I would my fiancé, and I have been doing just that. So why do you keep looking around to see if anyone is watching every time I say or do something nice? My fiancé wouldn't do that. You should work on being a real fiancé too for the next 6 months, instead of looking out for cameras or making jokes at my acting skills. Or are you just doing this for the fame you would get by being seen with me? Is that what you want? If that is it, we don't have to go through all of this stress when I can easily make you famous without having you live under my roof and pretend to be my fiancé, Brian said, gritting his teeth in annoyance. Sonia looked into his face with serious eyes. Why are you getting so worked up over nothing? You want me to act as a real fiancé? She asked thoughtfully. It would be pointless for me to treat you as I would treat my fiancé if you don't act like you're really my fiancé, don't you think? Brian asked, reaching out to touch the hair on the side of her face so that anyone watching them at that moment would think they were two lovers having an intimate conversation. Sonia raised her beautifully manicured hand to touch his ear as she looked into his eyes. I don't think so. It's my deal after all, and I call the shots, she reminded him with a smile. You had no intention of treating me as your fiancé? Then what is all this about? Brian asked in confusion. No matter how much he tried, he couldn't seem to figure her out. What did she really want? Why did she want him to treat her as his fiancée if she had no intention of treating him as her fiancé? What sort of a deal was this? I won't treat you as I would treat my fiancé, as doing that would mean I have to be very possessive of you. And we both might not really like that. However, I've heard what you said. I will stop acting so surprised about your romantic gestures, and I won't refer to your sweet gestures as acting skills anymore. Sonia promised and brushed the front of his shirt before pulling away. We should go in now. I don't want to miss any scene, Sonia said, as she intertwined their hands and they returned to the cinema area. Brian had a slight frown on his face as he followed her. He still couldn't understand the purpose of the whole thing. None of it made any sense to him. All she wanted was for him to treat her right, while she let him do anything he wanted? Did that also mean she could do anything she wanted? Accepting her deal as it was would mean letting her call all the shots and act whatever way she liked while leaving under his roof. Why hadn't he thought of that before accepting her deal? If he was going to treat her as his fiancée as he was already doing, then there was no way he could cheat freely or let her do anything she wanted either, since he had no intention of being in an open relationship with whoever he decides to get married to in the future. Brian stopped in his track and held her hand to stop her too. Sonia turned to look at him with questioning eyes. What is wrong? I want you to also act like I am your fiancé for the next 6 months, Brian said, making one perfectly carved eyebrow arch quizzically. Did you hear anything I said earlier? Sonia inquired, and Brian gave her a nod. Thinking about our deal in the light of day, I don't think it makes much sense. I won't really be benefiting anything from you within the next 6 months, apart from you leaving on your own volition once the time is over. So it would only be fair if you also reciprocate the actions within this period, Brian suggested. Sonia doubted he knew the implication of what he was asking. He was playing right into the trap she had set for him, but he just didn't know it yet. It's my deal, not yours. You don't have to benefit anything. Plus, we already signed the agreement, she reminded him with a small shrug. Then let's sign another one, Brian suggested. Accepting too soon would seem suspicious, Sonia reasoned. Is the agreement a joke to you? You should have thought of all this before accepting my deal last night. How valid is the agreement? If we can just cancel and sign another one anytime you want us to? Sonia asked with a slightly raised brow and walked away before Brian could say anything else. This was going really well, Sonia thought as Brian followed her. Once they got to the spot where they were to pick up their popcorn and drinks, Brian picked up the large-sized popcorn while Sonia grabbed the drinks before he could, and they walked into the cinema hall. The lights in the hall had been turned off already, since people were already seated and the movie was just about to start. Let's sit at the end of the hall, Sonia suggested in a whisper as she took out her phone and turned on the flashlight so they could find their way in the dark. There weren't many people in the hall, probably because it was still working hours, so it was just the both of them sitting in the back row with an empty row in front of them, which separated them from the next couple. Once the movie started, Sonia kept reaching into the popcorn box which was on Brian's lap, to throw some into her mouth absent-mindedly, while her full attention was on the screen. She only turned to look at Brian once when she felt his gaze on her. She flashed him a smile when she caught him staring at her, and returned her attention to the screen without asking him why he was looking at her. Brian, on the other hand, watched Sonia with a puzzled expression all the while. She had said she had a crush on him last night, but none of her actions supported her words. She wasn't making any attempt to seduce him, and she treated him like he wasn't anything special. She had even said there was nothing special about his kiss. She had also prepared breakfast the previous day for herself without giving him any. He had even seized her laptop just to make her go out with him. Thus far, she hadn't made any attempt to make him like her, so how could she say she had a crush on him? Even in their agreement, She had stated that he'd treat her as his fiancée, but was free to do anything he liked. Now, he had asked her to treat him like her fiancé, and she had refused. Why? What kind of a weird crush was it? What did she really stand to gain apart from fame? Now he realized that he was no longer very worried about her leaving, since she had promised to leave after 6 months. What worried him most now was trying to figure out what was in her head and what she really wanted from him within the 6 months. Something told him he was falling into a trap, but he couldn't understand what kind of trap it was yet. I think we should talk about our agreement again, Brian whispered to Sonia. Sonia turned to look at him, raising a hand to her lips. Shh! I don't want to miss any dialogue, Sonia whispered with a small smile before returning her attention to the screen. I could fill you in on whatever dialogue you miss. Brian offered, wanting to talk about it now. We can always talk after now, so allow me enjoy the movie, Sonia said without sparing him a glance. She knew he was used to ladies throwing themselves at him and giving him all their attention. She was going to be doing the exact opposite. She had decided on the name of her story earlier on. It would be Taming the Playboy Actor.